Kes. If we can please give ourselves a round of applause for making it this morning. My name is Pumelele Bohlela. I go by the name of Pumi B, and I will be your program director over the next 2 days. I look forward to getting to know you all. I know that in the room we are represented by different media representatives. We've got journalists, we have got professionals, we have got students, we have got community radio stations, and I myself am someone who's privileged enough to also be involved in the radio space in my local community. I come from a small town called Gamalake Township on the lower south coast, and I host a radio show every Monday where we talk about business and small business development in the context of townships and rural areas. So I look forward today to also learning. As much as I may be the pilot, we are all going to be in this together. So as someone who is a marketing professional and someone who enjoys to dance, and as someone who enjoys to get to know people through a mode of communication that I found very powerful, music and dance, I would like us all to just stand up. We are going to get to know each other a little bit better. I'm a marketeer by profession and a dancer by passion. And the way that I introduce myself is using a mode of dance, which I think all of us can actually learn. So it's Women's Month, and one of my favorite artists actually has come up, or she came up with this song a few years ago, but it still rings true. Uguti, who run the world? But now without girls, we cannot see an empowered man, and without empowered men, we cannot see empowered women. So we are all going to do this together, and I'd like you all to just follow my lead. It's also going to be a good way to exercise, and I'd like you to just over the next 2 days allow me to use my mode of language, which is dance, and we are going to follow something very simple. So hands on your waist. Everybody. Oh yes, Professor, I like that. Hands on your waist. And then there, you're just gonna bounce. It's a form of exercise. I'm sure we've all eaten. So we're gonna follow the beat. You'll hear the sound, right? So the lyrics are very simple. Who ran the world, right? But now there's a secret to dancing. All right, just keep moving with me. All right, Nazo. No, don't stop. Even if the music stops, don't stop. We just keep moving. It's a form of exercise, but it's also a powerful way to get to know each other. All right. And my DJ is going to give me the track in 4, 3. All right. Okay, so I want you to move your shoulders. All right. Now go. Can everybody see me? All right. So just turn your head to the left. Now, we're going to add one move, and this so you can really let loose. Alright, so it says, you strike a rock, you strike a woman. Alright, so fist in the air. Let's go. Who run the world? Girls. Okay? And I want you to give it like a nice punch in the air. When she says, who run the world? Girls. Okay, but now remember, there's a beat that we're following. 1, 2, 3, 4. Who run the world? Girls. Who run the world? Girls. Perfect. Okay. You guys are all there. Don't sit, don't sit. Okay, so I want you to give me attitude. Give me spice. Alright? Shake it. To the left. To the right. To the left. To the right. Stop. 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 Alright, when she goes with the lyrics, we all gonna give it a nice punch in the air. Alright, stop. Watch. through dance, and I'm sure that the way that you communicate is through your pens, it's through voice recordings, it could be through a camera. And I invite you all today, as we embark on this journey together, hosted by the DDP, to really open your mind, because we're going to be touching on some very key subjects, especially if you look at the world today, if you look at how media continues to influence the environment that we are in. So as I said, my name is Phumelele Bohlela. You can call me Phumi B. I am from a social enterprise called Iyaqhaqima, and I'm also privileged enough to host a radio show called Lokshin Biz, where we empower young girls and young women in the space of township and rural development. But it's not about me, and I definitely look forward to hearing more about some of our speakers and our delegates, and also the Q&A that we're going to be sharing. So we've got a handle that we will be using throughout, hashtag Media Summit 2019. So if you're posting on social media, just please make sure you include hashtag Media Summit 2019. And also, we are on social media as DDP_democracy on Twitter, as well as on Instagram. Without any further ado, I'd like to call our Executive Director of the Democracy Development Program, Dr. Paul Kariuki, who is going to give us an official opening and also tell us the purpose of the day, and then I'll continue to introduce our speakers and our delegates as they come up. So please, can we give it up for Dr. Paul Kariuki as he comes up on stage.
Well, a very good morning to all of us. I'm so thankful that you made time to come to be with us for the next 2 days. As you heard, thank you so much, Phumi, for giving that short background. DDP, as an organization that believes in the agency of ordinary citizens, believes that one way to enhance their capacity to engage is to inform them, educate them, and give them an opportunity and a platform such as this, where they can engage with one another, share views, and co-create something that they feel is very important for them. And we believe as an organization, without that element of education, it's very, very difficult for you to play your role as a citizen in a very complex democracy like ours. And so one of the mechanisms we use as an organization in educating and mobilizing citizens towards active participation in public life is through community media. And I'm pleased this morning to note that we have majority of our partners here who work with us in the community media space. We also have people from the different academic backgrounds who also have come to share with us their expertise and engage with us. Most of the civil society organizations are represented here. They're communications persons who are in the room, and of course, members of the political parties. So we can see the expanse of our work that reaches out through different sectors, and community media is really one of our powerful mechanisms that gives us the reach to be able to mobilize citizens and encourage them to participate actively in public life. Allow me please to honor our guest speakers who also accepted our invitation to come here today and share their thoughts with us for the next 2 days. We are honored to have Professor Anton Haber. Shall we put our hands together for him? You shall hear more about him when Phumi will be introducing and reading his bio, but I'm sure most of you have seen him on national television, on different spaces, giving a talk on various aspects of media, and we're really honored to have Prof here today. We have Mr. Simon Tsele, who is a KZN chairperson of the Community Radios Forum. Shall we put our hands together for him? We're really honored, sir, to have you all the way from Jozini, and he's here. We're still expecting Dr. Ademola, who's on his way. And we have Mr. Paseka Maleka from ICASA. Shall we put our hands together for him, who has also joined us. We thank you, sir, for traveling and coming to our function. And of course, one of our own, Advocate, Robin Siolan. Thank you so much. Shall we put our hands together for him? Tomorrow we're going to have our friend and our DDP board member, Nicholas Bauer from the ENCA. I'm sure probably most of you have seen him and heard about him, but he'll be here tomorrow and our close friend and colleague of DDP, former DDP staff member who has gone into another role now, Mr. Stembiso Matala, will also be joining us. So we have a very good lineup with very experienced people that are going to share their thoughts about this whole program around the role of community media in activating citizenship in our society. And we know it's a very powerful sector in the sense that given the reach that it has in terms of the entire country, reaching where you and I probably may not be able to go, we feel it's a very important mechanism that needs to be elevated. And we need to understand more how the sector is adapting itself to the different things that are happening in our democracy right now, and how its role is changing, if at all it is changing. And I'm believing that in the next 2 days, we're going to grapple with some of these questions that perhaps you've come with them in this room today. One of them is being that how can community radio stations and media in print and electronic remain relevant in a complex democracy like ours that is constantly challenged from different angles, where in most cases we see its independence being threatened? Now we want to believe that there is a way that the community media is adapting itself to remain relevant. How is it harnessing stories from communities themselves so that they can be able to communicate issues of development that are taking place in our communities? And we know from anecdotal information that sometimes community stories don't sell papers or don't buy programs. But we believe community media has a role to play in elevating the stories of our communities, because that is essentially why we believe they are established. And we want to know how is the sector adapting to harnessing ongoing basis the stories that emerge from our communities that need to be told, because it's not all doom and gloom in our nation. Do you believe that? Yeah? Do you believe that it's not all doom and gloom in our nation? There are powerful things that are happening in our communities, but some of those things do not see the light of the day, or even in our media. We also want to know how community media is adapting to the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot avoid technology. We cannot avoid its impact in the way it's shaping us in the way we interact with one another. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of good conversation around that. I'm curious to know how is the sector adapting to that. And of course, we want to know how is community media and harnessing of that information influencing developmental journalism. How are journalist students or upcoming journalist students adapting to what they see? And we have Advocate Robin to take us through that in his session. So I would like to encourage you to enjoy these next 2 days. It's your conference. The DDP and our partners have done the hard work to get it done to where it is. Make it your own. Make sure that you learn. Make sure that you network. And make sure that you come out of these 2 days with something that you can say it was worth your time. Welcome, and I thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Paul. Wow, we could give him a bigger round of applause. Dr. Paul, the two things that really stood out for me are this theme of co-creation, and also this thing of elevating our communities. And I think that with us all here being in the room, and as you said, over the next 2 days, we will make this conference ours. We will ensure that we get out of it what we put in. I really invite you and encourage you that as we have the dialogues, as we have the conversations, if you have questions or any comments that you have, note them down. We will be having a Q&A after each presentation. And we've also got our scribes who are going to be documenting everything in terms of the outputs that come out of this. And what I really like about the DDP is that it's not just about speaking, but we also take action afterwards. So I look forward to seeing and hearing what all the speakers and the keynote address delegates have to share, and also just hearing from us here in terms of what questions and topics that we want to hear being covered over the next 2 days. Now we're going to officially start with our keynote address, and Dr. Paul has alluded to the fact that we've got a lot of experience in the room, and it gives me great pleasure to read this biography. And when I'm done with it, I'm going to ask us to give this gentleman a huge round of applause, because as you will hear, his profile really speaks volumes, and I think that we can certainly learn from him. So Professor Anton Harber, who is from the Wits University in Johannesburg, He is the Caxton Professor of Journalism at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. He was a co-founder and editor of the anti-apartheid newspaper, The Weekly Mail, which is now The Mail and Guardian, editor-in-chief of South Africa's leading television news channel, ENCA, and chief executive of Kagiso Broadcasting. Professor Anton is the board member of the Global Investigative Journalism Network, chair of Africa Check, and former chair of the South African Conference of Editors and the National Association of Broadcasters. He has served on the boards of the Campaign for Open Media, Freedom of Expression Institute, the Institute for the Advancement of Journalism, Kagiso Media, East Coast Radio, and Radio Jacaranda. He is convener of judges for the Taco Kuiper Award for Investigative Journalism and has been a judge on the Sanlam Financial Journalism Awards, the Vodacom South African Journalism Awards, and the CNN Multi-Choice African Journalism Awards. Professor Harbour wrote Deep Sleuth in 2011, The Gorilla in the Room, 2013. He edited the first two editions of the A to Z of South African Politics, 1994 to 1996, What is Left Unsaid, reporting the South African HIV epidemic in 2010, and Troublemakers, the best of South Africa's investigative journalism in 2010. His Southern African Makaraking, an anthology of investigative reporting from the region, is due out in 2018. We are now in 2019, so probably it has been published already. So ladies and gentlemen, a huge, huge round of applause for Professor Anton Harbour.
Sure, thank you very much. Now I have to try and live up to that description. I think all it really told you is that I've been doing this since before many of you were born, for far too long. But don't you dare call me a veteran. It's a great delight to be here. I must thank Dr. Paul and his team for inviting me. I come from Durban, and my family is rooted here, so it's always a great pleasure to be back. I do expect you to deliver better weather, but I recognize that you don't have full control over that. And it's great to see many familiar old friends in the room. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm not going to make you dance. I'm going to try and make you think. I think we all share a deep concern for the state of our media and its capacity to do the job it needs to do, and that we are gathered today to confront this issue, to debate, to discuss, to work out what we need to do as media people, as media workers, as media activists, as citizens, as South Africans, as Africans. I think is of enormous value, so thank you very much. During this year's national elections, our Wits Radio Academy undertook a very interesting project called Local Voices. They took local reports in the build-up to the voting from a selection of community radio stations, pulled them together and made them available to a wider national audience. The project revealed very interesting patterns and trends, which was different to what we were seeing and hearing in the national media and in the national election debate. Community radio, we saw, was active and engaged in the election, hosting debates between political parties and giving voice to the issues people were raising in those debates and discussions. In fact, as was argued by my colleague, Professor Franz Kruger, who oversaw the project, community radio showed up the weaknesses of mainstream media coverage, which was focusing on the big names, the major drama, and the grand national narrative. What was coming from local communities through their radio stations was a different set of issues. What it showed was a disaffection with the poor provision of services, roads, schools, and stuff like that, ran deep. and communities were finding ways in which to confront the politicians on these issues as the politicians ran around canvassing for their support. For example, one consistent issue which came through from a number of these communities was a deep concern, even an anger, around water issues. The provision, quality, consistency of the water on which people's lives depend. Now, this may be familiar to those of you who work in community media, but it wasn't an issue we saw play much on the national agenda. We heard about other issues, like land, which barely featured when you heard the voices of people on the local level. The national media had highlighted the number of community protests which took place in the run-up to the election, and since then, but tended to only cover them when there was violence. What local radio showed was that it is incorrect to give the impression that protests are always or even usually violent. Since before many of you were born, for far too long, but don't you dare call me a veteran. It's a great delight to be here. I must thank Dr. Paul and his team for inviting me. I come from Durban, and my family is rooted here, so it's always a great pleasure to be back. I do expect you to deliver better weather, but I recognize that you don't have full control over that. And it's great to see many familiar old friends in the room. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm not going to make you dance. I'm going to try and make you think. I think we all share a deep concern for the state of our media and its capacity to do the job it needs to do, and that we are gathered today to confront this issue, to debate, to discuss, to work out what we need to do as media people, as media workers, as media activists, as citizens, as South Africans, as Africans. I think is of enormous value, so thank you very much. During this year's national elections, our Wits Radio Academy undertook a very interesting project called Local Voices. They took local reports in the build-up to the voting from a selection of community radio stations, pulled them together and made them available to a wider national audience. The project revealed very interesting patterns and trends, which was different to what we were seeing and hearing in the national media and in the national election debate. Community radio, we saw, was active and engaged in the election, hosting debates between political parties and giving voice to the issues people were raising in those debates and discussions. In fact, as was argued by my colleague, Professor Franz Kruger, who oversaw the project, community radio showed up the weaknesses of mainstream media coverage, which was focusing on the big names, the major drama, and the grand national narrative. What was coming from local communities through their radio stations was a different set of issues. What it showed was a disaffection with the poor provision of services, roads, schools, and stuff like that, ran deep. And communities were finding ways in which to confront the politicians on these issues as the politicians ran around canvassing for their support. For example, one consistent issue which came through from a number of these communities was a deep concern, even an anger, around water issues. Provision, quality, consistency of the water on which people's lives depend. Now, this may be familiar to those of you who work in community media, but it wasn't an issue we saw play much on the national agenda. We heard about other issues, like land, which barely featured when you heard the voices of people on the local level. The national media had highlighted the number of community protests which took place in the run-up to the election, and since then, but tended to only cover them when there was violence. What local radio showed was that it is incorrect to give the impression that protests are always or even usually violent. Communities were drawing on a wide range of tactics to draw attention to their local issues. Elections provided a rare opportunity to engage, for those communities to engage with national leaders. Part of what we saw was communities repeatedly threatening to withhold their votes unless these issues they were articulating came onto the politicians' agenda. Now, I don't want and need to glorify community radio. We all know there are many different community radio stations that do very different things. We know about the instability of the community radio sector, the shortage of resources, the battle with skills. We know about these issues. But what this shows is that even given the difficulties and challenges most stations face, they are able to give voice to local communities on everyday issues in ways in which the national media either cannot or does not. We live in challenging times for all news media, as the combination of political and economic forces threaten the viability of all our traditional media. Nobody's feeling healthy and safe and secure and well-resourced, and nobody is not struggling with the situation we find ourselves in as media, as journalists, and as media institutions. And what this means is that every day we are seeing less and less of the regular daily reporting that used to keep us informed. As newsrooms and outlets shrink, they are increasingly unable to give us the consistent, reliable reporting of what is happening daily in government, the courts, business, the streets, the factory floors, all those parts of civic life that we need to follow as citizens, and we need to know that our journalists are following, are watching, are asking hard questions, are pushing, prodding, and exposing where necessary to expose things. We rely on our news media to act as our eyes and ears on government, to tell us what they're up to, and to tell them what we as citizens want and need. When they can't do this, effectively, fully and properly, our democracy is at risk. And what is happening now, I believe, is that though we have a great deal of media freedom and freedom of speech, our capacity to make use of it, to make democracy work, is eroding rapidly. We produced recently at Wits Journalism our State of the Newsroom report for 2019 that looked at what happened last year in our newsrooms and tried to sum up all aspects of what was going on in all of our newsrooms. That report estimated that the number of professional journalists has halved in the last decade in this country, from about 10,000 10 years ago to under 5,000 now. And I think this estimate was overly cautious. I think there is reason to think it has shrunk closer to 1/3 of that. We used to complain that we were losing skilled specialist reporters in specialist beats so important to our journalism, and that was impairing our capacity as citizens to understand and explain complex areas of our life. Sadly, we've moved beyond this to the point where our newsrooms are barely even able to cover everyday life. So meager are our collective national reporting and journalistic resources. In South Africa, what is particularly worrying is the frequent absence of ordinary people, local communities, and their issues in the national political debate. The government, consumed by its own internal wranglings and petty politicking, the competition for political jobs and position and reward, the access to the feeding trough of the state, feels little need to pay attention to the issues of ordinary people when it's not election time. It is left to distant national leaders who live in the bubble of Parliament or the union buildings to articulate what people want. And what local voices and other surveys have shown is that this often does not reflect what people are saying on the ground. Community media has a crucial role to play in ensuring that national leaders get to hear what communities and citizens are saying. What are their real concerns, their real issues, their needs and demands? In other words, to ensure that our democracy is functional. Because it's not working if they're not paying attention to what citizens are saying and asking and demanding. Our future depends on bringing communities into the political sphere and ensuring they are engaged, have voice, and are heard. Community radio, community media, community press is a crucial element in this. But we know that much of our community media is struggling to achieve this, plagued by financial constraints, political pressures. What we have to ask and try and answer at a gathering like this is this: what do we need to do to deal with these problems and ensure that the community media is able to carry the voices of ordinary citizens and local issues into the heart of Parliament and the union buildings, into the national debate, and make the national media take notice of those issues? You know, I think that as media industry people, we view the challenges facing our media. We often express these challenges as a problem of our media industry, one that we in the industry have to solve by developing new approaches, new business models, new innovations, new media. But the truth is, and what we need to face up to, is it's much bigger than a media industry issue. It's not just a sectoral issue. It's a social, political issue of national importance. It's not going to be solved by the market alone or by the media industry working on its own. It's going to require social, political, and economic policy and action to find ways to deal with these issues. What is at stake is not just our industry, but our democracy. And the solution is not one the media industry can find alone. It requires the state, business, our lawmakers, our regulators, and most of all, our citizens to see and understand the depth of this news media crisis and to pull together to find a much wider, much bigger solution. If we are to meet this challenge, we have to ask and answer some tough questions. We can't look at the community media section alone, but have to find ways to deal with the problem in all our media across the board. So we ask, in that, what is the role of public broadcasting? Our public broadcaster, which of course has more resources than anyone else, despite its economic difficulties, should be setting the standards for daily reporting. But it seems to be unable to get out of a state of continual crisis, and one that is infecting our whole sector. We have to ask, what can the state do about the fact that the big internet players, the big five, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, etc., are eating up most of the advertising revenue, and wielding disproportionate and sometimes unrestrained and frightening power and influence. That's not something we can just solve as media workers. It's something we need the politicians, the state, governments around the world to engage with and deal with. Our business sector depends hugely on the news media in order to operate and survive and move ahead and grow the economy. What is the business sector to do about the fact the news media on which they so greatly depend is deteriorating sharply? Can they stand by and watch this? We have to say, where is civil society? We hear a lot of complaints about the media and about journalists. But do we see the non-profit sector rolling up their sleeves to help, to enlist in finding a solution? Without a vibrant media, civil society is much less effective. It is silenced, it is gagged. What can our regulators do to give us a more enabling environment for news media, to fulfill their mandate to grow and protect this sector? Why is our regulator not as strong and effective as it should and needs to be? What can our government do to ensure that media has the support and space to play the role it needs to play in our democracy? Does it do enough through its principal agency, the NDDA? And let me put that down to a simple question. Why is it that government can be discussing a 2 to 3 billion bailout for the national broadcaster? And believe me, it's one I support. But you have to ask, if that's what we're debating, why is all they can afford for the community media sector through the NDDA in the range of 30 or 40 million rand, a fraction of that? We have to ask, if we're going to be spending money, where and how would this money be best spent to develop the media sector? And of course, we have to ask, what can communities, what can citizens do to build a media and enable a journalism that meets their needs? The state of our sector that I'm describing is often, or even usually, blamed, I think quite simplistically, on new media technologies. Internet, social media, and how they're dominating the sector, taking all the revenue and the audience. Of course, there is truth that these technological developments have fundamentally changing our media world, how we make and consume media, and most worrying of all, challenging its financial viability. And these new media outlets have given voice to many destructive, dangerous, populist and malevolent forces who actively spread and promote false information, what we loosely call fake news. The hope we all had only a decade or so ago, as these media emerged, that the internet would democratize our media, would open up access, would break down the monopolies and the gatekeepers who controlled the traditional media, and would provide platforms for 1 million flowers to bloom and 1 million schools of thought to come into the public arena and to contend for our attention. That has proved more complex, more elusive than we ever expected. But keep in mind that every new media technology has brought a wave of panic about it, what it will do to us, and printing was formed, panicked about the effect this would have on people and what it would do to them, their morals, their family life, and to the church. It happened with radio. People feared that terrible things would happen. It happened with television. It happened with the internet. And now it's happening with social media. The doomsayers have said it with every new media technology. It will consume our lives and our time. It will pervert our children. It will break down family life. It will make our kids ignorant and stupid, and it will break down our social bonds. Well, it hasn't. This new technology also brings us incredible new opportunities to enrich our broadcasting, enable us to interact with our audience, do it all much cheaper and easier. The problem is not the technology, but the way it is used or abused. Most of all, if we leave this technology to be used and dominated by the racists, the nationalists, the populists, those who want to use it malevolently, then it is us that is at fault, not the technology. We have to grasp these new technologies, make them work for us, the citizens. We have to make them work for our communities. And we can only do this if our citizenry is mobilized, active, engaged, and turning all these new media tools to their advantage. Issue isn't the technology, it's who and how we use it. We are all concerned at this time, but what I said is loosely called fake news. The capacity of malign forces to use our media, particularly our social media, to spread disinformation, to pollute our political sphere with falsehoods. To counter this, we have to ensure the voice of ordinary people, the voice of our communities, is stronger, that it drowns out this noise, this pollution. We have to ensure that we beat down disinformation with real information, that we have proper daily reporting, solid journalism, to inform the public debate and give us the knowledge and facts to counter those who would mislead us. I think we're all concerned, certainly I am, that political debate is being replaced by name-calling, finger-pointing, abuse, threats, and in particular recently is often laced with racism and misogyny. A lot of this has been aimed at journalists, particularly women journalists, trying to do their job. We have to protect them. We have to say loud and clear that this is not acceptable, and that we value our journalists and our right to know, and we won't allow them to be threatened or intimidated. We have to stand up to the political bullies. But we also have to be aware that in this atmosphere, our journalism has been damaged and sometimes compromised. We can think of some great examples where journalists in this country have played an enormously important role in recent years in exposing wrongdoing, in challenging those with power and authority, in taking on both the public and the private sector where things are not the way they should be, and in demanding the attention of politicians and those who control the state. But we can also think of examples where our journalism has failed us, where we've allowed a journalism that we're not proud of. And we have to put our minds to ways to deal with that, to ensure that doesn't happen, to build our journalism, to build our capacity for journalism, and try and rebuild those areas where its credibility and its functionality have been damaged in recent years. We need to be concerned, I think, about what I call factional journalism. By this I mean journalism that seems to be there to give support, not just to a party, but a faction within a party. That is there not to serve the public, or the reader, or the listener, the audience. Not to serve the public good, but to serve one particular faction within a political party, whatever that faction is. It's not good journalism. It's downright bad journalism. And we have to counter it by giving our support, our encouragement to journalists who see their role as serving first and foremost the public good, to serving their audience and their community rather than any narrow political cause. We have to rebuild the sense of an independent, critical, credible journalism. And I put emphasis on the word independent. I know it's a contested word. I know it's a word that can mean many different things in many different situations. I know it's something we often have to grapple with, but I think it's fundamental to rebuilding a useful, functional, credible journalism and independent journalism. And mostly that for me is about one that doesn't serve any faction, doesn't serve any narrow commercial or political interests, but in the long run is there to serve the public good. If we've learned anything in this country in recent years, I would say it's that we can't rely on the political parties and the structures of government to always give us what we need. We cannot leave politics to the professional politicians. We have made progress when communities have been mobilized and active, when citizens are informed, engaged, and active to push the politicians and their representatives into doing what must be done and to stop doing what mustn't be done. Democracy has given us the tools to shape our lives and reshape the conditions under which we live. But we have to wield those tools. We cannot just hand them on to others to use on our behalf. And as I've said, one of the most powerful tools we have is our media, and in particular our community media. But it is only when it is genuine community media that is there to articulate and serve the needs and purposes of its community. My hope is that in this conference over the next day or two, we can tackle these issues, come up with some direction of what we need to do to meet these challenges, that we can mobilize the forces we need to tackle what I think are very important, very serious, very large challenges that not limited to any sector in the media, but all media. But today I'm emphasizing the importance, the basic fundamental importance to our democracy of a vibrant, effective, service, independent community media. I thank you.
Professor, thank you so much. If you can please just take a seat to our left.